My project focused on creating aggregate predictions of NFL games. My interest in this topic can be attributed partly to the sports betting industry itself. It's no secret that this industry is incredibly large. In 2019, there was actually $56 billion that was spent on the sports industry, which includes things such as tickets, food, drinks, transportation, etc. However, the interesting thing is that almost double this amount, $100 billion, was spent on sports betting specifically in the same year. The massive size of this industry led me to wonder how possible it would be to come up with a way to systematically beat the odds over time. When people who gamble on sports games, called bettors, decide on how to spend their money, outside sources will often influence their decisions. Now, the main outside sources which bettors will use include sports advisory services or experts claiming to be able to predict game outcomes. Additionally, bettors can use bookmaker lines to influence their decisions. Now, what is a bookmaker? They're simply the intermediary figure who facilitates betting and accepts wagers from bettors. They also decide on the lines of betting or what exactly the bettors are actually betting on. Finally, prediction markets can also influence bettors' decisions. So what these are a recently emerging form of European online betting system which functions without a bookmaker. In this system, bettors place orders of bets that they would like to make online, which shows up on the website in order to be matched by other bettors. And this or this trading site or system is now called a market exchange site. Since this constant trading publicly occurs online, the prices at which people are trading at can be analyzed in order to serve as an additional claims predictor. Much of the research in the field so far has focused on comparing the forecasting abilities of these different methods. So Fox and Meyer in 2007 found that since sports advisory services are unregulated, their abilities are limited. Essentially, anybody can claim to be an expert, and the study found that their accuracy was no better than random. Additionally, bookmaker lines were also found to be inferior to prediction markets in several studies, including Frank et al. In 2010 and Borgesi in 2015. Changes in the betting lines prior to the start of a game were also found to be more precise in prediction markets rather than in bookmaker systems. So looking more specifically into why prediction markets have this greater potential for accuracy, Borgesi 2015 found that due to the fact that prediction markets eliminate a bookmaker, the bias associated with the bookmaker trying to make a profit is eliminated. This also means that bettors have control over line changes throughout the entirety of the betting process, and that as bettors reveal the information that they know about a game by betting on it, the lines will begin to incorporate this information and therefore change. So this process aggregates the opinions of all the bettors in the market and therefore creates powerful predictions of the game's outcome. While the current research proposes prediction markets as the most powerful predictor of a game's outcome, it also proposes a relevant gap to be addressed. So none of the studies have managed to come up with a consistently accurate prediction method. They have simply compared which method has the greatest potential for accuracy. And this is done by comparing probabilities implied by the betting market to actual probabilities calculated from the game score. This in itself measures predictive capability, but it is not a prediction. Additionally, these studies have focused on European soccer leagues and haven't thus applied the relevant information to NFL games. Therefore, no study has devised a method of accurately predicting outcomes of NFL games while utilizing data from a market exchange betting site. So in order to answer the question of how the information in a market exchange system can be used to predict game outcomes accurately enough to generate profit, I created the following study. I created a prediction method I believe would be profitable and conducted a correlational analysis of its predictive accuracy. In order to do this, I collected a series of game predictions from a market exchange and then compared the predictions to the actual game outcomes, and thus was able to assess its predictive accuracy and answer the question of whether or not this method was accurate. And thus I hypothesized that utilizing the data from a market exchange, I will be able to create this accuracy. So in my study, I focused on 3 different types of bets. Moneyline, the simplest of the 3, simply involves choosing which team will win in a matchup. However, in any game, there's obviously an underdog and a favorite, and the favorite tends to win the majority of the time. In order to account for this, handicap bets involve adding points to the underdog score in order to make the matchup even. So in these handicap bets, bettors are betting on the spread or the difference between the two teams' points. And if you look at the image on the bottom of the screen, this sort of exemplifies the differences between a money line and a handicap bet. The image on the left shows two teams that are at an imbalance, and clearly one is more favored than the other, and that's a money line bet. Whereas a handicap bet, the team on the left has had points added to them, whereas the team on the right has had some subtracted from them, and that evens out the scales and therefore makes it a bet that's easier to make a decision on. And finally, over-under bets are just betting on whether or not the total score of a game will be above or below a certain value. And to collect my data, I took screenshots from Betfair.com. I chose this site specifically because it's the world's most widely used market exchange site. It accounts for over 90% of the world's exchange-based betting activity. Using the most popular site would allow me to aggregate as many opinions as possible and incorporate them into my predictions to increase my accuracy. My screenshots were taken 2 hours prior to the start of games in order to keep my data consistent and allow me to make valid comparisons for my data. So onto my selection of my predictions. This is a screenshot of one betting market on Betfair, specifically Indianapolis Colts versus the Lions on November 1st. This is an over-under betting market. As you can see on the left, it says over-under. The number 49.5 actually is the line at which is being bet. In order to select my predictions of the game's outcomes, I assessed the data in the yellow box in order to determine what the betting community believed was the most likely outcome. Now, you may be wondering why I only looked at the numbers in the yellow box. Clearly, there's a lot more on the screen. This is because those numbers represent the quantities wagered at the line that is automatically displayed by Betfair. This line functions similarly to a bookmaker's. However, this line may not necessarily be indicative of the majority of the proportions of betting. For example, the amounts wagered in this yellow box above the previous line are actually greater than those in the box below. This means that the more people have bet on this line, meaning that it would serve as a better predictor of the game's outcome. The line which contains the greatest total amount of wagers bet on it is thus the better aggregate line, and both the Betfair or bookmaker line and this aggregate line's accuracy are assessed in my study. Looking at my results, my data set covered week 8 through the playoffs of the 2020 through 2021 NFL season. Screenshots began at week 8 due to the timing of the onset of my inquiry. I was able to collect data from 127 total games, resulting in 127 moneyline predictions, 125 handicap, and 96 total points. There are fewer total points in handicap predictions because some screenshots did have to be eliminated due to technological issues with Betfair during the data collection process. In regards to my hypothesis that this prediction method would be accurate, the highest level of accuracy achieved by total points bets of 58.3% confirms this. Handicap lines with an accuracy of 52.8 to 53.6% were the second most accurate. The lowest was seen in money line bets at 40.2%. So in order to assess the differences in accuracy between the different choices of line, we compare the highlighted numbers in each double column to that to the left of them. So when you look at all the highlighted numbers in comparison to that directly to the left of it, it appears that the accuracies between the Betfair and better lines are highly similar. The better aggregate is greater only in the case of the handicap and combined lines. Now, if we look at the uncertainty values highlighted in yellow, we see pretty high numbers. The 10.12% uncertainty associated with total points bets means that the calculated 58.3% accuracy could really be anywhere between 10.12% of this number. So in reality, this 58.3% could be as low as 46 or as high as 70%. This doesn't mean that the accuracy isn't as high as it appears to be, but it does mean that the data needs to be confirmed. So if we boil down what we got from the data, we see little variation in the accuracy between the two line choices. In fact, after conducting z-tests, we find that the slight differences between the two data sets are even insignificant. This suggests that the bookmaker and market exchange systems are codominant in their forecasting potential. However, one limitation of this conclusion is that while the Betfair line functions analogously to a bookmaker line, it isn't exactly one. So the data isn't entirely representative one. We can just use it to make comparisons from. So on our comparison of different bet types, we see that moneyline was the least accurate bet, and after testing was found to be significantly less so than both other types of bets. However, the differences between total points and handicap accuracies was proven to be insignificant. The 40% accuracy found by the moneyline bets does imply that betting against this prediction method would have been accurate 60% of the time. However, moneyline bets don't involve a line, and therefore the odds at which are being bet are much more important. This prediction method did not incorporate the odds of given bets, and so therefore the high accuracy from betting against this method is likely due to chance. In addition to the direct proportion of times my prediction method was successful, we also assessed the line accuracy of this method. So what that means is measuring how closely the Betfair and Betr aggregate lines correlated with the actual values found by the games. We see that total points bets had slightly lower root mean squared error than handicap bets and a much greater variance. So as you can see on the left, the root mean squared error for total points bets is lower than on the right for handicap, and the variance additionally is much higher. In order to understand what we can take from that data, we must understand how handicap and total points lines works. Handicap lines tend to range from 1 to 14, whereas total points lines tend to range from 50 to 57. This implies that due to the similar ranges and root mean squared errors of the two lines, that they were predicted equally well. However, the ranges of the datasets don't necessarily tell the entire story. For example, the dataset may be largely clustered around some arbitrary central value, and therefore its total capacity for error would be low. Therefore, the variance, which measures the magnitude of the spread of the dataset, must also be considered. So in this case, the variance of the total points bets of 220 was much larger than that of handicap, which was around 70, meaning that there was a much greater spread in the data. Total points bets had this greater spread in combination with a lower error, meaning that it had a greater total capacity for error, but its error was lower nonetheless, meaning it was a better predictor overall. So in order to assess my overall goal of creating a profitable betting strategy, we must consider the 11 for 10 rule. And what this rule states is that in order for any prediction method to be profitable, it must win greater than 52.4% of the time. And this is to account for the commission that bookmakers charge when taking bets in American bookmaker system. While my method managed to achieve this level of accuracy, its unresolved uncertainty values showed that I did not have enough data to confirm it. However, combining data sets was promising in terms of achieving this benchmark level of accuracy. In overall conclusion, my data provides evidence while confirming the predictive potential of market exchanges, while also suggesting profitability over time. However, I do suggest a larger study to confirm its validity, because its high uncertainty values could be problematic for bettors, right? We do see a 58.3% accuracy with total points bets, but again, there is the uncertainty, which you wouldn't want to place your money on something unless you're more certain than we are about this data. In addition to the fact that it proposes evidence saying that it's accurate, and also the study of the line accuracy showed that total points bets have the highest potential for predictive accuracy based on my study. Additionally, I suggest that another study be conducted focusing on predicting money line outcomes specifically. However, this time incorporating the odds of a given bet, because my method specifically didn't incorporate the odds, and the odds are integral to a moneyline bet. On other note, I believe that's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys for coming to watch. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Ryan, I know you couldn't hear them, but they were clapping. So are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go ahead and ask you your oral defense questions. And the first one asks the following. How did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your research process?
Okay, so I had to make a bunch of decisions throughout the entire research process when I was deciding on which type of bets I wanted to study. Because, for example, there are a lot more types than just moneyline, handicap, and over/under. You could be doing a parlay, for example, which involves selecting multiple different types of bets, and you only win if all of your bets win. And if I were to have chosen different bets to study, the process that I would have had to gone through in selecting my predictions would have been different, because there would have been different things that I would have had to consider. It's like the odds for a moneyline bet, which I didn't use in my method.
Okay. Thank you. Next, how did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
Well, the main large limitation that my paper or my research sees is that I didn't have enough data specifically to, I guess, confirm the validity of my results. And if you read my paper, I go a step further than I talked about in my presentation, and I actually, using the formula to calculate for uncertainty, I derive an equation to solve for the number of data points I would need to achieve desired 1% uncertainty value, and it actually comes out to be 9,725 games. And that just in and of itself sheds light on the scope of the study that would need to be conducted in order to actually achieve this. Because in half of a season, I was only able to collect 127 game predictions, if that makes sense.
Okay, good. And then your last question. How did your expert advisor facilitate your deeper understanding of the research process?
Yeah, so my expert advisor, Aaron Olson, he was actually really helpful throughout the entirety of this process. Him and I would have meetings where I would like basically just like bounce off my ideas of what I had throughout, like to go through my process of my project, where I wanted to go, what I thought I might study. And then as I began to collect my results, I would like tell him what I saw in my data and like what this might imply. And then when I would describe that to him, he would respond to me with questions that would then facilitate my thinking and require me to give it a deeper thought of my own and really question why specific things were happening. And really his questioning in and of itself helped spur a lot of the conclusions that I came up with.
Are you able to give me a specific example?
Yeah, for example, on the line variation or the line accuracy study that I conducted, I actually wasn't able to get much from that at first until I began to think a little bit more about the differences between like how total points and over under or and handicap bets actually worked. And I had a slight inkling of an idea of what a conclusion I could come up with from that. And I sent him an email about like what I thought, and he basically responded to me with a series of like 6 different questions, and they were basically math problems, and going through and answering those questions allowed me to figure out the relationship between the variables that I was trying to understand.
Ryan, that concludes the scored portion of your exam. I'm going to go ahead and open up to questions from Dr. Allen and Mrs. Kylegar. Would either of you like to ask Ryan any questions about his project?
Yes. Hi, this is Elena Allen. Nice job, Ryan, on the presentation. I thought you did a very eloquent job of describing all the betting terminology, which was completely foreign to me, but I was able to follow, I'll say 85% of it, which I thought was pretty good. A lot of terms there that were unfamiliar. One question, I think, given the results that you had and the degree of uncertainty of those results, like noting the limitations of the sample size that you had because the kind of short season and such, would you pursue this betting protocol in the future? What, like, if you're, I task you with making money off of this, which you may be planning to do, what would you do differently? How would you take what you've learned to either pursue this or kind of edit your protocol and go forward?
Yeah, so I actually like part of the reason why like I also delved into this topic is like sports betting is kind of prominent in my family. Like my uncle likes to do it a lot, and I was kind of trying to sell him on this paper and say like, hey, look, read my paper. If you if you want to try and confirm the results of my study, I say you religiously bet on my prediction method for the entirety of next season and take notes of what happens, and let's see if it's actually profitable. Because I would actually be interested in seeing if it would work out in actual effect. Because I know I've read numerous studies, people coming up with prediction methods, but I don't know if any of the researchers have actually tried using them. And I think that would be interesting to follow through with.
Would you?
Would I specifically? I honestly, I don't think I would trust my own method right now with a degree of uncertainty.
It's fair. It's a fair answer.
But like, I mean, I don't think you would lose a large sum of money. I think you would most likely be very close to breaking even or win a little bit amount of money, because with like the 11 for 10 rule, like the 52.4%, if you're winning 52.4% of the time, you're breaking even. And if you think about like your margin of profit that you're making off of winning, if you're winning 55% of the time, say, that like you only have like a 3% more times that you're winning than or you're winning 55% of the time, losing 45% of the time. You're not actually gaining that. It's not like you're going to be quintupling your money, I guess. You're going to be, it's almost more like an investment, or like how you would earn interest over time. It's a long-term thing.
Yeah. I had another question. I don't know if there was another someone else who wanted to ask one. I'll take turns. So I just because I don't know this space, but I'm wondering if you considered, as you were developing your methodology, expanding the same criteria to another sport that also participates on the same betting infrastructure website. Was that something that you considered? And then were there obstacles that kind of impeded that? Because that could have given you a lot more games to study, and then potentially another factor of interest, which is like it maybe works much better on NFL games than it does on, you know, like women's soccer or something.
Yeah, so for my project specifically, I wanted to focus on NFL games, and like I started off looking at just like fantasy football in general, and it kind of expanded and moved its way into like sports betting. And then as I'm like looking at sports betting, in the context of like combining different sports to get more data, I don't necessarily know if you can make valid like conclusions upon that, just because like the predictive accuracy between different sports would obviously, like, it would be different because there's different bettors engaging in those markets, and the sports are entirely different, and there's different information available to the people they can access and research and find. And so it would be interesting to do an analysis on which sports are better at being predicted, but I don't think you can necessarily combine them to increase the data. I just chose NFL specifically for this fact that I only had 5,000 words in this paper, and I didn't want to also be taking thousands of screenshots of NFL and hockey and soccer games. Like, I had to individually tabulate all of the data, and all like on those, like the screenshot that I showed from that betting site had probably 20 different like 6-digit numbers that I had to add up together in order to come up with my predictions for each game, and I had to do that for 3 times for each game throughout the entire season. And it took me probably, I'd say, like 30 hours of working on my spreadsheet.
And I'll tell you, if you do it again, you find a friend who knows a little coding, and you say, let's write a 4-line Python script that does some web scraping and pulls those numbers down to save you the 30 hours. But I'm sure that was labor intensive on your part.
Yep. I definitely wish I knew more about programming so that I definitely considered doing that, but I did not know or have the resources to figure out how to do that type of coding.
Next time.
Any other questions?
Talking. You're not hearing me, but so Coach K says she doesn't have any questions, but she will catch you in the hallway and grill you later on that.
For some betting tips.
Or maybe to get some betting tips, or I don't know, some fantasy football stuff. Dr. Allen, I would like to just once again thank you for coming. We really appreciate it, and I know Ryan appreciates it. And that concludes your presentation, Ryan, but do not log out.
Any comments from the class?
Any comments from the class, friends?
Very impressed.
Elena, you're free to go whenever.
You did great.
Thanks,
Well
Casey. Bye-bye.
No, I think it's very well. On my pay grade. That conversation was about.
Sorry, stop recording. Yeah, but hey, I wanted to tell you.
Did my dog come in the background of my presentation?
We're eating.